Welcome to the Classical Drunks, the podcast that attempts to make rationality great again. For this episode, Aaron and I sat down to break down drug design, testing and approval processes. We often complain about the prohibitive costs of medical drugs, but greed does not necessarily explain the whole story behind such prices. As usual, I am your host, Emmanuel, and with me is Aaron.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast.
So, today we wanted to talk about something a bit funny. Drugs.
Drugs!
The legal kind.
Boo!
So, healthcare is now, it is a very, very important topic in our public debates. And we're a bit lucky because our friend Aaron works for Big Pharma. And so we wanted to talk a bit more about what happens around drugs and how they're made and why are they so freaking expensive.
I will preface this just first by saying that I am not some big uppity exec in a pharmaceutical company. I am just one of the... I might as well be a lab rat, okay? I am the lowest rung at the moment. I'm just one of the techies, one of the analysts for a pharmaceutical company.
Essentially what he's saying is just a janitor in a big pharma company, but at least that qualifies him to talk about healthcare economics.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit of an econ nerd, so we thought that would be interesting to kind of dive a bit into the intersection of those two universes.
That is actually a study. It's called pharmaconomics, which is the economics behind pharmaceuticals.
Here we go.
The benefit and cost-benefit analysis of drugs and their benefits to the patient. So there
okay,
you go.
So let's start from there because, so that in itself is not necessarily a point that's without any sort of controversy. Just with the idea that there are costs and benefits to healthcare. That's already a swear word. That's already breaching some kind of a taboo.
No, Manny, I should get all of the healthcare because I want it.
Because I want it.
Because
I deserve it.
Human rights.
I should just have it.
Yeah, it's just mine. Obviously I think, healthcare costs, drugs in particular, cost money to make. That's just a fact of life. And, we have to look and weigh the benefits and all that, and the risks as well associated with that drug and the costs associated with that drug. And well, obviously we don't really do that because we pay for drugs collectively at the moment, either through insurance or through a state health service. So there's not really an incentive for the individual to look at
be price
drug
sensitive.
Costs. Look at drug costs in a more rational way. But
that's my point. It's like without even getting there, I think that there are a lot of people. I don't know if there's the same people that listen to us, but to a lot of people, that question should not even be asked. That is to say, for a lot of people, healthcare, the fact that the whole point of a public policy in healthcare should be about making it so that costs don't exist anymore. I think that there is that idea out there that their thinking when it comes to healthcare is to say no matter the cost.
Yeah. Oh well, it should
be free.
Yeah. Oh no, if the big wigs at my company hear me saying that we should be rational about costs in healthcare, then I'm losing my job. It's like what? But yeah, obviously though drugs they cost a certain amount of money, and either way, I think drugs are always going to be expensive just because of the fact of research and development, approval, all that kind of. It's just naturally very expensive to start with. So I
except
don't think
except maybe for some drugs that have extreme general purpose, maybe aspirin.
Yeah. That's because everyone takes a few aspirin a year. You've got the benefit of mass markets behind you of people that want your product. Whereas if you're dealing with more specialized drugs, which the industry is moving towards more and more, we have very few drugs where we're having unmet medical need at the moment. That's the new area is unmet medical need because there's so few of it out there.
So can you elaborate a bit? When you say unmet medical need, do you mean people who have afflictions and diseases
which aren't being met through
where there's no
drug, there's no treatment. The only treatment might be palliative. in that way, which is becoming increasingly more rare, which is a good thing. It's great. It means we have more drugs to treat patients. The cat just walked into the room.
Yes. Oh, we might maybe. Well, it's not related to drugs, but at some point maybe we'll have time to talk a bit about cat healthcare, because it's actually, from an economic point of view, it's very funny.
Yeah.
Because there is no mandated insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I got, like the wee bastard that just walked in the room, I got him x-rays for €200.
Yeah.
And it just talked to any hospital for humans.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, they're generally like, yeah.
But I mean, an X-ray, yeah.
An X-ray, yeah. So another, so if we can just run through very quickly, I think the costs associated with drugs, if you want to talk about that.
So
where
just,
we can make savings and
yeah.
where
So
we can't.
just for the purpose, is that something that's general to drugs, or are you already diving down into the more specialized drugs that you were just mentioning? Is that something?
Well, these are like more general drugs. But
okay.
Like,
so let's say.
Yeah.
Can you give an example?
So, for example, like all drugs have to go through research and development stages to start with. Research and development for your standard drug can be anywhere between 3 years, or it can be 12 years. It's 15 years. It can go on and on and on. And the Association of British Pharmaceutical the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry says that for every 25,000 compounds that are tested, only one will go through and be approved, an approved product. So you're testing all of these compounds for efficacy, safety, all that kind of stuff, and you're really only getting one through out of every 25,000, which is a huge amount. This is why it takes years. They're actually getting medical robots, research robots, to actually go through these compounds now and try and automate the system. That's how much it's going through, which is good because it's cost saving, but also jobs. Yeah. We should do an episode on automation actually one day. That would be very interesting.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. So all of that costs about 2.6 billion then per new drug going onto the market. It is sidelined to R&D. And that's not even taking into account the failed drugs in research pipelines. So, you might have, for every, 2.6 billion it costs to get that one particular drug on the market, you might have brought many drugs forward or many compounds forward that you invested hundreds of millions in research and development and then realize, it's not really working. And those costs have to be recouped for your failures as well. And your failures are much more than your wins in the pharmaceutical industry. So they also have to be accounted for.
So let me just recap. So already so from I have some kind of a compound that I've drawn on the whiteboard to that's going to be approved. You're already taking from 20. You said 25,000.
Yeah, that's according to the Association of British Pharmaceutical
25,000 to one that gets approved.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that drug is going to be economically viable.
No, not necessarily.
That's just, hey guys, we have a compound and it works and we've tested and we've got it approved. But then you also have to ask, well, is it worthwhile?
At this stage. You haven't even got it approved at this stage. This is just you've taken it through the development stage and you've got the drug that you want to submit. You've got the compound that you want to submit for approval.
Okay, so you haven't even submitted it for approval.
Yeah.
You don't even know at this stage, if it's going to be economically worthwhile.
Yes. Usually, basically, you would have like a pharmaceutical company would hire doctors and economists to kind of look at areas of need and where they can actually make a dent in the market and make a profit before they would go down researching a compound for that particular, before they research for the compound itself. They will look at where the market's going and that kind of thing. So once we have that, we submit then for trials and approval. So you go through your preclinical trials then with your FDA, the FDA knows about your drug at this point once it's gone to preclinical trials. That's where we're basically doing tests on animals, which are phenotypic trials. So you're seeing how the drug works in a system, aka the body, and that's usually done in mice or primates or that kind of thing. And then once that you submit to go on to human trials. So you have phase 1, which is only maybe 50 people, and it's just to test safety. You mightn't even be testing in actual patients at this point. You might be just testing in, healthy males. We use males to avoid pregnancy, because women getting pregnant can fuck up trials.
Yeah.
So
at this stage, so you're giving the drug to healthy subjects to
test for safety.
Okay, test for safety. So the idea behind that being, if there's any side effect, we want to make sure that we have the strongest, healthiest people to handle whatever side effect may come to them.
Exactly, we're not putting patients at risk.
Okay.
Yeah, so
all right.
that minimizes risk.
So that's phase 1, you said?
Yeah.
For human.
Phase 2, we usually have a few hundred people. And it depends on the drug. So if it's an orphan drug with a very low patient population, you might only have a few dozen. But this usually comprises a few hundred, maybe 500 patients. And you need that because you want good data, basically. At this point, we're not looking at whether it's safe or not. We're looking at efficacy. We're looking kind of at dosage as well, what dosages work. And then if it's proved to be efficacious, if it's proved to work, we will then move on to a stage 3 trial, which will usually have 1,000 to 3,000 patients. Again, large numbers for good data. This is something the FDA have gone for in recent years. They wanted large numbers because they want it to be statistically very sound. There are some people who say that you could actually have a lot less, and that sometimes people say that phase 3 trials aren't really necessary. And then there are others who say that it is. So it could be an area to make savings in.
So just so I understand, so phase 2 is more about testing it on real patients that will need it and try to figure out the efficiency and the what's the right dosage.
Yeah, you're starting to look at dosage as well in phase 2. Phase 3, they'll really get the dosage down, and you'll also be looking at it in different populations. So, you'll be making sure that you're having a very diverse population group. So you'll have people from all genetic backgrounds, all age backgrounds, And
if I understand it properly, phase 1 is kind of a safety step of we're not going to go further because the negative effects are really too strong.
Yeah.
And I guess that phase 3, that's where you kind of start populating that list, the small list on the smaller, the smaller, less important
effects. Don't take
effects.
this if you have diabetes. Don't take this if you have hypertension.
Okay.
That's where you're getting.
That's the phase 3.
Yeah, you're also getting like lots of.
Don't take this if you've just hit your toenail in the bed.
Yeah, absolutely. So. There are some drugs, what the FDA has done recently, they've got like a new fast track approval system where you can actually get approval at stage 2. And then that basically gives the company confidence to start making the investments in capital costs, building a new factory, hiring staff, all that kind of stuff, and it fast tracks the process.
Because essentially, after phase 2
whether it's effective.
Okay.
So,
but phase 3 just narrows down the fine prints and the details, but you don't need those obviously to start manufacturing and.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Yeah. So that's okay. So that's a new process, is it?
They started doing that. We can thank the gays for that. Actually, really, I shit you not. It came out of the AIDS crisis back in the 80s.
Oh, and they had drugs.
There was when it was a really slow three phase process, and people were dying, and the gays were essentially like, we need these drugs now. We need to either speed up the process or that. And the FDA was like, okay, well, we have unmet medical need because there's no drug we can actually give them at the moment to combat the AIDS. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially, because we know that it's effective, we're going to essentially... we're still going to have a phase 3 trial.
Yes, so it's still a requirement.
It's still a requirement.
But it gives more confidence for the company that's manufacturing them. Like, hey guys, you have your stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Proceed, but at least you don't have the risk of doing phase 3 and actually have to roll back because the FDA said no.
And usually the product then gets priority in the review process for when the FDA is going through the paperwork and reviewing the trials and all of that stuff. So to get it out on the market as quickly as possible. The company I'm working for at the moment, they are currently making a drug which has received fast track approval. So which is good because it means that if it hadn't have received fast track approval, it would still be in phase 3 clinical trials right now, and I wouldn't be working for them. Yeah. So
and very quick point, because we had a bit of a laugh because one day I was binge watching on Dr. House, and I gave you a call because they were describing a drug. So the episode was shot in the late 2000, and they were describing the drug, and I was like, but that's what Aaron is working on.
Yeah.
At the time, the drug was in very early experiments, and so that's the kind of time frames, because your drug now is at phase 3. Is it?
It's a phase 3. Yeah. So
that's the kind of time frames that we're talking about.
Yeah.
During Dr. House, that drug was in experimentation, and they're only manufacturing at mass manufacturing it now.
Yeah.
So that's not a fast process. That's almost 10 years.
Yeah. So that's an issue that people have. So you have like the fast track approvals now, which are like generally speeded up a little bit, but it's still a still very slow process. And again, when the R&D, when you take into account, you have to add that on as well beforehand, which could be another 5 or 10 years of research and development. And so it's a long process. So and obviously by it being a long process, it's obviously a long process. It's obviously a very costly process as well. So, yeah. And then you have also capital costs, which is factory, that kind of thing. Every other kind of manufacturing kind of investment that you have. So, for example, except it's usually more expensive because for some reason everything in science costs more. I have no idea why. It just seems like you can't you're not making a normal product. You have to make it under sterile environments, so that adds
that's what I was going to say. Is that you guys don't have the same standard.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, something as silly as probably pens. The pens that we buy for the company, like I work in IT, you guys probably have different pens that cost twice the price, or it's something
I don't know.
silly.
We still use just normal Bic pens.
Oh, okay, to you.
But I'm more talking about the fact that if you want to, you
or
can't just have where a normal company would build just a building.
Yeah.
We have to build a clean room, so it's made
which costs
millions rather than maybe you'd spend a few million on a thing. You'd spend like tens of millions.
Yeah, quick reminder, a clean room is a room where there's literally no dust.
Yeah.
And you walk around with those like weird white you look like a
we call them bunny suits.
Yeah, you look like an alien essentially.
Yeah. So and as well, generally you're also like in terms of manufacturing costs, staff are generally a large proportion of that, and because it's such a I don't want to toot my own horn, but such a high skill industry, you generally have very well paid staff. So yeah, this is why I throw my money around all the time. So yeah, that's another issue with it. So so the operating costs are much higher. Another thing I'd like to point out, which I think is an area, because we can't really make savings unless we're going to
well, we always can, but
yeah,
everything has a cost. So
everything has a cost, but I'm saying unless you want to
lower,
you can obviously make savings. We can find places to make savings in manufacturing, but it comes to a point at which you can't make savings because you're going to cut back on safety. You're going to cut back on quality of the product. So somewhere you can, I think, make significant change would be patents. If you're looking at them, I don't know. See, this thing,
it is a tough question though, because the whole process you described is enormously costly.
Yeah, okay, we're talking billions. I know.
So so you just cannot say you cannot say we expect private companies to throw billions in R&D, and as soon as they release the drug, every other company can copy it.
Exactly, I completely understand that.
Nobody is going to make that kind of investment.
Yeah,
no one will.
Innovation needs to be protected. That's definitely I agree with you there. But I think in terms of what we look at when we say, for example, in America, a new chemical patent lasts 20 years. Do we need these patents to last 20 years if we're investing, I don't know, maybe 10 billion into a drug, and we're expecting that drug to make 3 billion a year? Does that match up? I don't know.
So I don't know about drugs. I can tell you quickly about software, because in software, it's not in Europe, but in America, there's such a thing as patents for software, which is very silly because the life cycle of a software is I mean,
it's months.
Yeah, I was going to say, if a software lasts 5 years, that's rare. Not many software last that long.
Yeah.
So I when you have a new drug that comes on the market, what's its life cycle?
Generally, as long as it's on patent. After it goes off of patent, what you'll have is generics, which are basically the exact same drug, just made by another company who hasn't invested all of that energy and resources and time into the R&D. They're basically just copycats.
Okay, so
always
right now,
buy generics. They're way cheaper.
yeah. So right now it's 2017, which means that every drug made before patented before 1997 is available and can be replicated. I presume, or maybe a bit longer, but what I was going to say is I presume that for most drugs, alternatives are available in terms of generics as of today.
Yeah,
unless we were talking about, you know, like specific diseases and stuff.
Yeah, so there's a lot. So what happened? We're in a very weird time at the moment, because if you look before 1990s. A lot of the drugs were what we called small molecular drugs. We were using old school chemistry to make the drugs, aka we were like getting a big vessel, mixing chemicals together, putting them under certain pressures, certain heats to derive a molecule that we wanted, that was therapeutic.
So literally cooking, exactly.
With put on a massive industrial scale, at
precise quantities,
and under a very sterile environment.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only difference. But nowadays, what we're doing is we've got what we call biologics, which are a godsend in a way, because they allow us to make basically whatever we want. Nearly at this point, we use cells, we genetically modify them, and tell them the protein that we want them to make, the drug that we want them to make, which is great. Because it allows us to make very complex drugs. But these these kind of have flooded the market and are way more efficient and way more effective than the previous drugs that we were using. And we can see there are very few drugs now that are made that are the old small molecule. Most of them are the new large molecule.
Okay, okay, so here's the question.
So a lot of them have gone off market.
But here's the question then, because
and they're all the new ones are under patent. So
right, but a patent is on the molecule, not on the fabrication process.
So yeah, you can have.
So that's what I'm wondering. So let's say I don't know, like aspirin. So now it's not patented anymore.
Yeah.
Anybody can manufacture aspirin.
Yeah.
And let's say you have a new genetically modified cell that you described that
Sorry,
produce...
I should have been. I was talking about like specialized drugs back then, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to my original question then, because I knew, like, generic is something that we keep hearing about, and I'm and like, you're the expert on the topic. I am not. I'm under the impression that we massively underutilize generics. Am I wrong?
Yeah. So there's a trade-off. So you can use generics
for when it's available.
For when it's available. The issue is that sometimes generics aren't available for the drug that you're looking for, even if that drug was manufactured back in the 90s. For example, we have Enbrel, made by Amgen, released in 1994. It was actually approved, and went off patent in 2011, I think, based on the weird patent that it got. But 3 years before that, it had a sub. So what they did was they this is the thing, you can have there's an entire industry around lawyers and specialists called evergreening, where you extend patents basically for pharmaceutical companies. And what they did was, essentially, with Enbrel, they patented the protein these two proteins that fuse together. They patented the proteins, and then what they did was they submitted a patent for the method that you used to fuse the proteins together, and they basically held it up for about 10 years in the actual patent office.
Oh, okay.
And then they got it approved, so they essentially extended their patent by 10 years, because the new approval process for fusing the two proteins together was only released 3 years before, so they got a 10-year extension essentially to their approval. But there's an entire industry around that, and there are some things with patents where you can for example, if a company changes the formulation slightly, they can extend their patent another form of evergreening. If they make a change of the delivery system, let's say you have a pill, you can change that to an aerosol, inhale it, and it gets into the bloodstream quicker. You can say it's an innovation.
That was the issue with that was the issue with the what's it called? The insulin controversy, EpiPen, EpiPen in America, where it was just epinephrine, which is I think is not patented anymore, is it?
No, it's not. You can actually,
so you can
get it here in Europe, but there hasn't been an approval yet for a second manufacturer in the States.
Right. So because there was a controversy and some people showed, well, look, you can buy a vial of epinephrine for a few bucks. You can buy a needle and just inject it yourself. EpiPen would have costed hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
Which I mean, like, there's no question there. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Of course. But the thing that I wonder is that's the difficulty. You try to balance. On the one hand, you want to make sure that you have an incentive for companies to invest,
absolutely,
in research and drugs.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the prospect of making profit, they're not going to do it. And I think that's kind of a psychological barrier for a lot of people who would object to that system. They would say, "Oh, but companies are making profit." I think it's important to remind that no one, not even I, not even you, nobody, wakes up in the morning and go work for free. We all go to work because we expect to be financially better off at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And no company, it's the same for companies. Companies invest into drugs because they expect to make a buck at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's more than what they put in.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And companies should expect to make more than they put in.
That's what you want on one hand. Yeah. On the other hand, it is true that they are definitely using and we can point to specific instances of abuse of the patent system.
Yeah.
And I don't have a really an answer for that because it's really hard to balance.
I was thinking on the way here, I had an idea, but I don't know, like maybe I'll bounce it off you, but I was thinking in terms, particularly because we've seen abuse of the patent system, I think in particular in relation to the pharmaceutical industry, where we have an entire industry grown up around evergreening, which, entire giant law firms are built around. Should we have something where it's kind of, let's say it costs you 10 billion to make a drug and get it to market. Should we say that your profits from that drug, once they hit 200%, 20 billion of that, should you automatically go off patent? So it wouldn't matter the time and I'd be
extremely cautious, because if there is one thing I can trust those giant companies to do is to hire accountants. To come on, we live in Ireland.
To fix the books, probably something like that.
We live in Ireland. We have an entire industry here that's dedicated to moving numbers around to make sure that the profits are all moved here to pay a lower corporate tax. So I can see where you're going with this, and it sounds simple on paper. I'm just like, the first accountant is going to be able to
fix books in the way that's advantageous.
But that's a question, because the thing
basically, what I've done with this is moved it from lawyers to accountants, right?
Which in a lot of cases actually is the same guy. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So it is, and yeah. So I mean, that's a good question. I would say, and again, I don't necessarily have an answer to it, but I would have a couple of thoughts. Mm-hmm. The first is, I think that we can agree that 20 years is very arbitrary.
Yeah.
For some drugs, it's going to take more. Like, we're going to talk a bit more about extremely specific drugs. Going to take more than 20 years to pay back.
Yeah.
For some others, if you have something that's actually extremely useful, maybe in just a few years, you may have already covered your costs. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the solution is. Maybe it's a solution on maybe you should be able to you have a limit on the amount of drugs that you manufacture. I don't know what the solution would be, but have a fixed one size fits all time constraints is very arbitrary. Mm-hmm. It seems to me, and you can argue for less, you can argue for more. The bottom line is, if you say we're going to put more, if you move to 25 years, we're going to have more drugs on the market, but they're going to be more expensive. If you lower it to 10 years, we're going to have
possibly less drugs being
they're going to be more affordable, but we're going to have fewer drugs available. So I think that's whatever the number is, it's very important to at least keep in mind that it is a balance. And maybe the balance, again, I don't know for sure, maybe the balance is too weighted on one side, right? Maybe that number is too big and we just need to reduce it, period. But you have to understand that you can't break that number down to zero.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I don't think anyone except crazy
I think
people
some do. I mean, it
but surely they would have to know that that's going to like discourage the R&D side of the industry.
But again, that's what I was saying. It's really not. If you talk, I mean, it's really not uncommon to encounter people who say that healthcare shouldn't make any profit and it should all be for free, and it's immoral that money is even involved in that process in the first place. Not understanding that it's a massive industry that employs millions of people and just cannot be, it can't be nationalized on the go, and it's the difficulty. So, and here's something that's kind of worth asking as well. So, the issue is because we were talking about. So you have the technical aspect of I'm manufacturing a drug and I'm testing it and it works, it doesn't work, the very medical, and you publish a paper and you have all your numbers.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, your company is going to decide or not to manufacture a drug based off the what they expect to make in terms of sales versus their cost. And to me it sounds perfectly reasonable because again, they're not here, they don't run on love and hugs, and at some point you do have to make a buck. But I think that a lot of people would object to the very idea that market forces should dictate what drugs are invested into. I know what I would answer to that, but what usually, I mean, is that something that people tell you?
Well, at the moment, market forces aren't really placed on drugs. Well, they kind of are and they kind of aren't, because, again, like I said, we don't pay for we pay for very few of our drugs directly. A lot of our drugs are paid for at the moment through health insurance, which we just pay a standard amount into and then maybe pay a copay, depending on your particular insurer. Or they're paid through a national kind of health service. So, like, for example, here in Ireland, we have a national health service that pays for certain amount of drugs, particular drugs, and there are,
just to very quickly, for people who are not necessarily very familiar with how the public healthcare system works in Ireland, it's mostly for people of low income. If you're working in the private sector, you'll have private insurance.
Yeah, you're generally given private insurance if you have a good job. Or
can you remind me, what is it again for pensioners?
Pensioners, you have free healthcare basically.
Public. Okay, so it's kind of like an American system where you have a branch for retirees and for
and then if you're in a lower income bracket, you get free healthcare. If you're in a higher income bracket, it's subsidized, and then you can get health insurance on top of that if you want private healthcare, or if you just want that health insurance to just cover the non-subsidized section of the public system.
Got it.
Yeah. Or you can just pay out of pocket.
You can see already that I'm a young, fit, healthy person that didn't have much of a healthcare expenses outside of a couple of dentist visits.
Yeah, you're lucky for the moment.
I'm young.
Yeah.
So the drinking habits haven't yet induced any cancer.
Yeah. So people are very, as we were saying, because of these reasons, people are very not susceptible to market forces when paying for drugs. Like in Ireland, for example, even if you have, we have what's called a drug payment scheme. So no matter what, it's open to anyone, no matter how much money you earn. And it means a maximum you will only pay €145 per month for any prescription drug. So, well, any approved prescription drug, which is like 99% of them. After that kind of amount, there's no incentive to save money because the government's going to pay for all of it.
And that's so here's the thing that I've been and I mean there are solutions to it, but I think that's really the core question. So anyone who is economically minded knows that the only way you can bring the price down is at some point you have to have a demand for lower prices.
Yeah.
And there's an issue that you just described. It's that if you don't pay directly out of your pocket for something, you're not going to demand lower prices. You're not going to pay attention to either any equivalent, any competitor that can provide at a lower cost, a lower price. Now the issue is it's on purpose, because we want to make sure that anyone has access to healthcare. Healthcare is important, and we want to make sure that this is not just because you're out of a job, it's a recession, and you lost your job. Oh well, you don't have access to healthcare anymore. That's not necessarily something that we're very happy with.
No.
So that's something that's a tough question. How do you how do you balance proper economic incentives, where on the one hand, on the other hand, you're saying, just forget the economic incentives. We're going to pay for drugs no matter what. Mm-hmm. Which that combined with the monopoly system we've just described for patents, it means that there is not much of an economic thinking in the system.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm, kind of, really.
So that's why drugs are so expensive in short. Mm-hmm.
So we need to kind of find a way kind of to, one, provide... I'm not saying bankrupt people for wanting drugs. That's obviously not an issue.
We want to avoid that, definitely. That's the question. That's the trick.
We do have to make them somewhat, susceptible to like the financial onus of paying for drugs. So maybe they pay for, I don't know, a percentage of the drug, or rather than just having a standard cutoff point for where we pay for it.
I'll just
maybe
mention,
you pay for 10%.
Well, 10%, the problem is if you're talking about a drug that's, you're familiar with those, you have drugs that would require, let's say, €10,000 a year treatment. That's not hypothetical.
No, that's complete. Yeah, look at Humira, which is not covered in this country, and costs $50,000 a year.
Yeah, so
we don't want a system like that. But we don't want a system like that. I don't want a system like that personally. Anyway.
So that's the trick, and we don't have time to get too much into the how, the solutions. And again, this is really, we're just the purpose of that episode is just to give a bit more context and explain a bit more what the problem is before we can even try to formulate solutions.
Yeah.
It's just, we have someone from the healthcare industry trying to explain, guys, we're not making cupcakes.
Yeah.
This shit is expensive. So even it's
only going to get more expensive the more specialized healthcare and medication becomes as well.
So that's a very interesting thing as well. So just very quickly to wrap up on patents. Let's say we just scrap patents altogether, and we find some kind of a magical system where we still retain all that investment. The profit part is not the bulk of the cost. Just the research, as you were saying, you just narrow down. You start from thousands of different molecules, and you narrow down, and you cancel so many of them in the process.
Yeah,
that's not getting away. That is not going away. The cost of manufacturing. Building the factory with the white room and everything, that's not going away because you've deleted patents. So those costs are still here.
Yeah. That's not to say that pharmaceutical companies don't have very high margins, but that's because they can get away with very high margins because of the patents, because of the lack of consumer
but there are the two
care for prices.
What I was saying is you have the two things. Yes, they're making profits and substantially so. But at the same time, there are a lot of costs that can be ignored. And so even if you remove... What I was going to say is the drug you mentioned, that's $50,000 a year.
Humira, yeah.
Okay, it's not $45,000 profit and $5,000 research, development, manufacturing, testing.
Yeah,
that's not that at all.
Yeah,
I don't know how much you would cost on if you would cut on the cost if you removed profits. The actual pure profit, once you've accounted for all the cost, you're not going to have the price of the drug.
Yeah. No, I don't know what AbbVie spends on R&D and all that kind of stuff, but I know my company personally that I work for, about a quarter of its revenues every year goes towards R&D. It's about $5 billion a year that goes towards R&D. So it's a huge chunk.
It is.
Yeah.
So I think
but that's because my company basically only operates. It doesn't make generics. It only operates on branded drugs. So.
And you were going to talk about drugs that are for extremely tight, extremely small markets.
Oh yeah, so at the way so we've gone through kind of like back in like a few decades ago, we had the kind of first round of like, you know, drugs that were kind of focused towards the general population, the general big illnesses. So like you had a drug for breast cancer, okay, or you had, you know, that kind of thing. And now what we're doing is in the industry is we're looking at, okay, well, what causes breast cancer in general? How can we narrow in on specific targets like BRCA1 and say, okay, well, we want to target BRCA1 and turn that off, or, you know, stop.
Very quickly, BRCA1 for...
Sorry, genetic mutation which causes breast cancer, basically.
Okay.
How can we target that so that it's not causing breast cancer?
But that's not all breast cancer. You're targeting...
no, you have PD-1, you have a bunch of other targets.
So you're narrowing down on one specific cause.
Yeah, so something that individual might have a BRCA1 mutation, which causes them to get breast cancer. But that's not the cause of all breast cancer. So say it's only maybe, let's say it's, I don't know what the percentage is, let's say it's 20% of breast cancer is caused by BRCA1 mutations. So we're now targeting not just breast cancer as a whole and marketing to an entire group, like global population with breast cancer. Now we're marketing to a fifth of the population with breast cancer. Let's say, for example, I don't know what the percentage is for BRCA1, but
yeah, but you still have the same R&D costs.
But you're still having the exact same, like you still have the same capital costs, you still have the same operating costs, you still have the same R&D costs, you still have the same approval costs. You know, so at the same time, it's costing the same amount in capital and operating costs, but you're targeting a market which is like a fifth of the size, maybe smaller. So that's
not the most extreme case.
Yeah, and that's not the most extreme case. So that's, you know, so what we're doing, but it's, in a way, it's good though for the patient because we can tackle that specific target and we can be very specific about treating their individual illness.
So on the specific example you gave, what you would do is you would actually try to kind of silence the cause of breast cancer in advance and prevent the development of cancer.
This is if you have breast cancer already, yeah.
If you have breast cancer,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But like it's more what you need to know is basically.
But I guess it would be maybe more efficient.
Instead of attacking like a general cause, or you know, you're attacking a specific target which causes it in that person. So that's the difference.
All right.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue then, because from an economic point of view, you have the same upfront, to boil it down in a very simple way. If you look at the equation now, you have the same upfront cost, but you're not going to have anywhere near the same revenue.
Yeah, because you don't have the same customer base.
Right.
Or patient base.
So it's not like penicillin, it's not like aspirin. It's all those costs have to be shared across a group of people that's more and more limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually an entire area in the pharmaceutical industry called the orphan medication sector, which in fact deals with very specific very specific diseases that only affect very small patient population groups, like, for example, cystic fibrosis, which only affects 70,000 patients worldwide. One of the new drugs by Vertex only instead of tackling the entire 70,000 patients, which is already a tiny population group, Vertex have made a new drug which only battles a specific target within that population, specific molecular target within that population, which only makes up 15%. So I can't do math in my head. 15% of 70,000, not that many patients.
I mean, I'm trying to do some math. It's like 100,000 of the pop. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's a tiny amount. It's so when we look at that, it's a tiny population to make money from. And then we have to remember that we're only going to be talking about entertaining even the idea of paying for this drug in populations that are living in the first world. So
yeah, so if you have CS in Nigeria,
you're kind of fucked.
Yes, in the first place.
Because your government's not going to be able to pay
you live in Nigeria.
Yeah, because your government's not going to be able to pay for that. They're going to they're actually going to be smart and make the economic decision, which is going to say, no, because instead of paying $200,000 for one drug for one person, we're going to give
vaccines.
We're going to give 50 people HIV medication, or we're going to give, we're going to give like, we're going to give
200,000
50,000 people vaccines for something. Yeah. We're going to, And it makes more sense economically to do that.
And it's not, but well, not just economically. I mean, it's like the trolley problem, where you kill the guy who's gonna, you kill a bystander, or you nuke Paris. Mm-hmm. That's just like the trolley problem time 100,000.
Yeah. I'll throw the company I work near. Anyway, I don't want to give the company I work away for. But anyway, the company I work near, they're called Alexion. I can throw them under the bus. They make Soliris, the world's most expensive drug, $500,000 a year for treatment. It's they actually have, what they do is it was discovered in Netherlands that there was a patient advocacy group, and they were getting funding to lobby the government to pay for this drug. And when you looked into where the group was getting the funding from, guess where they got it from? Alexion. Yeah. So they can afford that, because they know that, like, the first world, we can pay for that here if we do it collectively. So yeah. That's an interesting thing. So, but that if you take the orphan drug market, which makes up about, in terms of actual price, makes up 1/5 of the entire pharmaceutical industry,
revenue.
Revenue makes up 1/5 of the entire pharmaceutical industry, makes up 1/1500th of the entire population of patients. So It's a very inefficient system. But there's lots of incentives. There's a European fund for paying for this medication. They get special FDA fast track approvals. They get reduced price for reduced prices for approvals in the FDA. Same with the European Medicines Agency. Same with the Canadian Health Ministry. Same with Japan. So it's they have lots of incentives which is why the Orphan Medications Act in America was kind of a double-edged sword. It pushed investment towards orphan medication, which is good, but at the same time, it's bloated that side of the industry, I feel. So, yeah.
It's a really tough moral question. I'd say that's where definitely you get closer to the edge of the kind of questions that get you thrown out of fancy dinners, parties.
Yeah, when you say, I think that, the economics
the economics doesn't
keeping
check
this person
out.
alive.
The economics doesn't check out. I mean, if you have, like I always give that hypothetical, imagine you have a child that comes to a hospital emergency, and he's on the brink of death, but it's going to cost $1 billion to fix up the child. Mm-hmm. Are you morally obligated to pay for that, or are you going to say, no, we can use that $1 billion in 100 times more efficient ways to solve that issue?
Yeah.
So that's the and then more. So that's obvious here because I just said $1 billion.
Yeah.
Well, is it that obvious for 50,000? Is it that obvious for 12,000?
Yeah.
So that's the more question that's hard to answer.
Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I don't blame people, because when these patient advocacy groups for these orphan drugs come out on TV and that kind of thing, and you see a kid who's
that's
sick.
That's no fun.
It's not. Yeah, it's not good. You don't want that, and I totally understand why people get behind these patient advocacy groups and lobby for the government to pay for these drugs. But at the same time, I think you're missing out then and looking at all of the other kids that could be helped.
Well, I mean, look at what's happening
by the same amount of money.
Yeah. So look at what's happening all across the West. Healthcare costs have risen in absolutely unmanageable levels. We were talking about the NHS during one of our latest podcasts. That's one of the reasons why, if you look at what's happening in France, what's happening in America, it is driven by a huge increase in costs of medication. So
medication makes up 1/5 of the entire healthcare.
Right. So the thing is, and we all want to be generous and we all want to be compassionate. That's not the question there. But if you start, absolutely. If at some point you say, in order to save one kid, we'll have to put the entire system in jeopardy and go through austerity measures, which I don't think nobody's really happy to do. And that's the free market guy talking. I like reforms, but austerity cuts are no fun. And austerity cuts is what happens when you sacrifice long-term stability for short-term, political gains.
Yeah.
So you say in the short terms we're going to pay. Some group comes up and says, we want that drug to be covered. And you say, well, I want to be generous and progressive, etc. So I'm just going to say yes and vote for it. But if that challenges the stability of your system in 10 years' time, you're going to have government who's going to have to make cuts that are not going to be fun to go through.
Yeah, and you're going to have to make cuts to either the program that you installed, paying for this very expensive drug, or maybe for another program, which is maybe might help a lot more people, but maybe not be as noticeable.
Yeah, so that's a tough call. I always say, so for example, when the leading causes of death, so one thing that I absolutely love is if you look at what kills people, if you look at the sort of unsuspected causes of death, the number of people who die of the flu every year. You were laughing, but it's like
no, I know. Yeah,
it's 300,000 people a year.
It's huge. Yeah,
for something that's so benign. Talk about low-hanging fruits, and you have so many preventable diseases. We're talking about resurgence of
I don't want to give everyone like super. I don't want Manny to scaremonger people in against the flu. By the way, these people who get the flu and die are generally they're very old or they're very young. They're not people listening to this podcast,
true,
or they're immunocompromised or something like that.
That's true.
Or they have complications.
No, yeah.
So
absolutely, no, you're right. My point was there are a lot of things that harm the population that are not necessarily on TV. The leading causes of death, like I was looking at charts of leading causes of death, the overwhelming majority are self-inflicted. Alcohol, smoking, obesity. When you look at what kills people, it's not terrorism, it's not cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one, and how. That's where it's difficult to have an objective economic analysis of the situation, because then you start saying, well, we can help on the flu and it kills 300,000 people a year. We can, we've eradicated diseases of the planet of the Earth, of the face of the Earth. Which was is malaria still occurring?
It's still a thing, yeah.
Which one did we? I always get the two
Smallpox?
wrong. A few decades ago.
Yeah, smallpox, polio, a few of them are on now.
Yeah,
we've eliminated a fair bit of stuff.
Right, so that's the difficulty. It's like you're
except
spending...
for the anti-vaxxers, they're bringing some stuff back. We should have an episode on them as well.
Anyways, I know, but and that's the it's a very tough moral question, because yes, there is such a thing as a cost and a benefit analysis to be made. Simply because we don't live in a world where money grows on trees. Or
not even money, just when you think about it, it's just terms of resources just don't grow on trees, and time doesn't grow on trees.
Right.
So there is, I think a lot of people just sit down to dinner sometimes and think, oh yeah, and then the steak magically appeared in the shop and I bought it for money. We have to remember that there are hundreds of jobs behind every single product that we use. So that includes healthcare.
So there are ways to bring down prices, but they're not necessarily politically correct. You mentioned we can lower standards. Maybe we can accept that.
I didn't say that. I work in quality control for a pharmaceutical company, and I did not say that.
No, but you didn't say it explicitly, but you said costs are high because we have high standards.
We could, but we shouldn't.
Right. No, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean. It's like, okay, why is it expensive? You come to me and say it's expensive because, well, we have very high standards of safety.
Yeah.
Do you want to lower cost? Well, we can lower standard of safety.
Which we shouldn't.
Which, I'm not saying we should.
Okay.
I'm just saying there are solutions. I'm not sure that they're acceptable.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Okay.
Again, cost and benefits. What's the cost of, we know the cost of the safety standards. We know what the benefits are as well. Are we getting the buck? Are we getting what we want, what we expect out of it? Well, that's a good question. Mm-hmm. But those should at least be measured in an objective manner, and we should be able to say, well, okay, here's what works and here's what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be true, and I know it's going to sound horrible, but it may be true that for certain drugs, the cost outweighs the benefits to society, just because you cannot divest, and I'm making up numbers, but you cannot divest a fifth of GDP to, provide healthcare for a handful of kids, no matter how awful it sounds. You just cannot.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think you're kind of right in this term, but I kind of want to say that's again, kind of that's the fringe-ish kind of, but again, that area is growing.
It is and it is not, because healthcare
Yeah.
costs have risen through the roof.
Yeah, it is.
And we
but
know
I mean,
that-
like, most drugs should be for people living in the first world, should be fairly affordable. Again, it's kind of it comes down, like, yes, they're very, but like, again, when you look at drugs, generally you're only paying for them for a year in your life, 2 years in your life. These kind of, unless you're on something like, unless you have a chronic disease like cystic fibrosis. Okay, most of us, if we get cancer, we get it for 18 months, 2 years maybe,
And then you die.
and then you die, or you get better. You know, it's yes, it's a harsh, you know, an expensive procedure. Even if we could lower costs, it'd still be expensive. But it's only for a short amount of time. You know, it's not like it's going to bankrupt you forever. You know, so yeah, it's yeah. Anyway,
but that's I would say that's the difficulty, and that's at least what I hope we've brought to you today, in a sense of, you know, those things are not that simple.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make such a blanket statement as to say, oh, just liberalize everything, open the market. Well, okay, a lot of people won't be able to afford most drugs. Mm-hmm. But period. That's so, and we don't want that. Then you have the other extreme that just says, just nationalize everything and have the government pay for everything.
Yeah.
Well, then there's just no limit to what we pay.
Yeah, and then we're just going to have the system collapse.
And we just have, so we'll literally would have to enslave the population, the working population, to pay for the medical bill of, and that's not even going to be enough, because there is no limit to the demand. There's always somewhere some healthcare problem.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of life. So how do we manage to strike a balance? And I'd say really that was, I mean, to me, that's at least that's my hope, that we brought to you some insights on well, it's not really that easy. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Right. Thanks for listening, guys. We might come back to this and talk about it again, because healthcare is a huge topic.
Yes.
So
Maybe next time talk a bit more about solutions, because we didn't
Yeah.
provide many today. That's true. And like, we've already, you know, been done longer than we do usually on regular podcast. But
Okay.
we'll definitely come back to it.
Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.
You've been listening to The Classical Drunks, hosted by Aaron Buki and Emmanuel Bourgerie. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes, and if you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, review, or share it on social media, as this will help others to find the show.